Thanks for joining me for Central Christian Church's Wandering Conversation series, a series created to inspire, inform, and entertain. Today we're talking about spiritual transformation with our guest, the Reverend Phyllis J. Leopold, better known to most as PJ. PJ is an ordained minister in the United Methodist Church and is currently serving in her 19th year as the Executive Director for the Association of Religious Communities, otherwise known as ARC. ARC is Danbury's only explicitly interfaith organization. PJ has been a powerful and influential leader in the Danbury community, and during her tenure, ARC has become one of the most important community organizations in the greater Danbury area. Next month, PJ's leadership at ARC will be coming to a close as she's transitioning back into parish ministry, so I was excited to get to sit down with her for a few minutes and have a dialogue about spiritual transformation. I hope you enjoy this conversation with the Reverend Phyllis J. Leopold. Thank you, PJ, for joining us today. Would you mind, I'm sure a lot of people know who you are around Danbury. You've been around Danbury for a long time, but would you briefly just give us an introduction to your work and maybe give us an insight to what you did before you came to ARC? You've been at ARC for 18 years, so just kind of introduce yourself in a way that gives us a little bit of history and context as to who you are.
Sure. PJ Leopold, I'm a United Methodist minister. I have been at ARC for in my 19th year, and before that, I was ordained an elder in the Methodist Church in 1985. I've served 5 Methodist churches. 4 of them were inner city. One was in Trumbull, Connecticut, and I've served 3 nonprofits, the longest of which was at ARC.
Great, thank you. So can you tell me a little bit about talk a little bit about your journey to where you are now? I mean, I'm sure you've been on a long journey of faith. You lead now the only interfaith organization in Danbury. And so can you talk a little bit about your journey from not just considering going into the ministry, but just a journey of faith? Like, what was the initial experience that formed you as a person of faith, if you have?
Sure. I grew up in Long Island in a little town called Seaford, and we had the world's most wonderful minister, except the children, the policy was we're not allowed to go to church. So my mother would drop me off at Sunday school every week, and I would wait at the front door, and she would go to church. And then when I knew she was settled, I would run over to church, and I would sneak in the back pew. And I had never heard an organ. I had never seen a choir. The minister had a spotlight. It was so much drama. It was so beautiful. I couldn't even read, and I would pretend I was singing the hymns and laying down in the back pew. So the Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Cozine, she used to send these postcards to the house. We miss Phyllis in Sunday school. And my mother knew darn well she'd drop me off, so she just figured I was confused with another Phyllis. So one day I'm in the back pew. Oh, and then I would always run back to Sunday school where my mother would pick me up at the door. So one day I'm laying down in the back pew, and I hear a loud from the corner, and I poke above the pew, and it's Mrs. Cozine. So I was busted. So she puts out her finger and goes like this, and we walk across the church parking lot to Sunday school, and I was shaking in my little Mary Janes. And then she knelt down beside me and she said, "Phyllis, God has put his finger upon you. When you grow up, you're going to be the greatest thing in the world. You are going to be a minister's wife." I had no idea what I said, "Well, is that a good thing or a bad thing?" So she said, "Oh, that's a very good thing." So I continued to get dropped off and go to church, and she never sent another postcard. So along comes this great minister, and you were only allowed at the time to be an acolyte in the church if you were a boy. And I really, really wanted to be an acolyte. So Reverend David Vernoy he was the first minister we had where you went by the first name, Pastor David, not Reverend so-and-so, which was a big fastouche. But Pastor David let me become an acolyte. And I really felt it was always holy when I got to light the candles in God's house. I really, really loved that as a kid. It came to confirmation. You had to be a boy to preach the confirmation sermon. And Pastor David picked me. So my first sermon, I guess, was when I was like 13.
Wow.
And then, Pastor David was moved to another church. And I went off to college, and I was going to finish school by going next to Johns Hopkins to get a master's in social work. And I had to take this one darn class to fulfill. It was on religion, and I chose interfaith religion. Mm-hmm. So there it was that we studied Judaism, Muslim, Islam, Christianity, all these different world religions. And I really was very sheltered. I never knew about all of these wonderful ways to God. So at the end of the class, I went to the professor and I said, where can I learn more about this? I love it. And he said, you should go to Yale Divinity School. Mm. And I said, oh, I'm not a snob. Where did you go? And he said, Yale Divinity School. So I'm sure that's what cost me the difference between the B++ and the A-. I'm sure that was the
sure that's what it was. I'm just
so I went to so then I went to Yale, and I really only went to divinity school to get closer to God, my own faith amidst all these other religions. And it was while I was there that I had the call to ministry.
Okay. It's a really interesting story. And I want to go back to your initial experience, because you've had a little bit different of experience than a lot of people, where we were forced to go to church and you were able to, you weren't supposed to be there and you snuck in. So I'm wondering if, how that, it sounds like you were filled with awe and wonder of the service and of the experience of being in the presence of worship. I wonder how do you think that had any effect on where you are now? That initial experience of faith?
Well, absolutely. I mean, definitely. I do find God's awe and wonder in many other places. I remember when I was very little, I asked Mom, where did God live? And that really is what started me running over to the house. She told me God lived in church. And I wanted to see where God lived. That's really what started the whole thing. But there was, and I think that awe and wonder, and that God does live in awe and wonder, and that might be in those four walls, or it might be in the awe and wonder of housing a person who's homeless. So I do think that was a great underpinning of my faith foundation. And there was also part of, I think the way it also affected me was there was an usher. And to make that spotlight come on the minister, there was this big wheel that you had to make all the lights go down in the church. And he let me used to run over. He's the only one who saw me in the back pew. And he would let me come and turn the wheel. And I thought I was turning the lights in God's house. So, sometimes you got to break some rules. That usher, whoever he was, really was, I still remember him. And my teacher, who didn't send the postcards anymore, she's the only one, Mrs. Cozine, that I remember the name of. Sometimes you have to really do things a little differently that the system might not allow as well.
So one thing I'm finding too is commonality is an exploration of a variety of faiths. How did your study of other faiths influence your own?
Well, really, when I studied it, we were learning in books. So the mosque was in a book, that we had to read in college, and the Baha'i, all the different religions were in books. Now they're on the corner. They're in every city, suburb. And so that transition to ARC was like a dream come true, because I had the very course that changed my life from Johns Hopkins to Yale Divinity was interfaith. So I think it's wonderful to see so many people trying in different ways to help us all to see God's love and God's call to taking care of each other.
Yeah, that was one of my curiosities. And now that you've been running this organization, ARC, that is dedicated to service, so the core of it is lifting people who are dealing with poverty and some sort of financial issue or stress in their lives. How has the service, I guess, what does service mean to you in regards to faith or living out your faith?
I would say that service to me at ARC has been a very private thing, because with the exception of a few programs like Interfaith Peace Camp or the Forum on Faith, we don't really use God language in our nonprofit. So for me, it is really an internal motivator. And I think that probably, I do believe, I have learned through life that Genesis is a very important book. I'm getting an error message. Your internet connection is unstable. Okay, well, that fits where I was going anyway. I do believe that out of chaos comes good. And I think that we're constantly dealing with chaos in people's lives. And it was really God who brought this creation out of chaos and everything in it. So if we can be an instrument that can help people move from chaotic points in life to goodness, I think we're being instruments of God's will. And I think also, I think of Micah when I'm at ARC. I have a little scripture. It's been with me on my desk. It looks at me just like my family picture looks at me. And you know, to seek mercy, to walk humbly, and to do justice. And that really summarizes it for me. So sometimes you have to really bear in mind that we're not a savior. You know, that's God's role. We are humbly just trying to walk the walk with people. And sometimes that walk might not be individual. It might be in terms of justice, working against one kind of system and working for another kind of system. So I think it's a quiet spirituality, and it's an inner motivation, sort of to be like an instrument of what we can only do our best to bring that goodness out of the chaos.
Mm-hmm. So now, after, I guess, 19 years, in your 19th year, you're transitioning positions and going back into the ministry, going back to church ministry. One,
never left ministry.
Never left ministry, church ministry. Yes, there's more than just
right.
ministry.
I
guess, how do you feel, like, where are you now as you look towards transitioning back into the church? And how has these past 19 years maybe changed the way you view the church, changed your view as the role of what a pastor does, and just how you're feeling about moving back into the ministry, church ministry?
Well, I would say that my denomination is in trouble, in a sense, not unlike most. There loss of membership, major issues still undecided. LGBT is a very divisive topic in our denomination, which grieves me. And I think with the bishop's invitation to go to this church, or the bishop's appointment, there's a lot of chaos. And I'm looking forward to bringing some goodness. I do not know my people yet. I haven't even started, so I don't know where they're at. And I think it's really important to meet people where they're at, and then to figure out where do we want to go. So I don't have any great big mission that I'm going to impose. I have had many thoughts and many wishes, and we'll see. But I do need to know where the people are. And I think that one of the things about the way ARC has affected my ministry is that probably every 2 weeks, probably 24 times a year, people will come into my office and say, at ARC, and say, this is a great idea I have, and ARC has to do it. And they all, one after the other, are great ideas. But I think what has really kept ARC strong is that we stay within our mission. So we really can't do everything, even though they are great ideas. I've really sort of been the gatekeeper of what goes to the board, which one of these ideas. And I'm looking forward to church, because I kind of feel like we have a lot of great mission, but that we've also, as speaking generally, that we've strayed from our mission. And I love mission. I believe in mission. It might be growing myself. It might be growing things beyond the four walls of the church. But I think that not trying to keep up with the world and we are the only institution on earth that has been called to share God's love, God's definition of justice, God's definition of humility. And IBM does wonderful things, and all other kind of companies, let's say, they all have their missions and they stick to them. So I really think that we have a wonderful and very unique, and there is the awe and the joy. I mean, how wonderful to be able to do that. So I know that there are some struggles with membership. I know there's going to be struggles financially there. And I think that could self-resolve if we really, maybe they have stuck to their mission and it hasn't worked. I'm sure I'm not the first one to think of that, but I feel very strongly about that. It's where my passion is.
Thank you. Last question before we go is, one thing I've began to really think about is, and there's a lot going on. A lot has happened during this shelter in place. I think systems that were exploitative or systems that were broken have been exposed. It's almost like the water has receded and all of the faults have appeared, whether that's hunger, whether that's medical, whether that's health insurance, whether that's disparities, domestic violence. All these issues in our world have been almost like amplified during this time, this pandemic. And so I've been thinking about what moral courage means for us as people of faith, and what our responsibility is to have that moral courage. So just real quick, if you could, when I say the word, what does moral courage look like for you?
I think moral courage, if there's moral courage to come out of this, I would hope that it's a lifelong commitment and not just a passing phase. I think moral is not instant or short-lived. And courage, I think that the earth is trying to help us muster up our courage, and then we have to stick with it. And regardless of the results, if these systems are not dramatically different by the end of our life, if we have contributed and done our best, and maybe they will change, things do change. But I worry that, I remember a tsunami some years ago wiped out 9 countries. And the whole world, was, every time you turned on the TV, you could give money, and Hollywood, of course, was singing its heart out to say, and then boom, it was gone. Like we have like memories of 3 days or 3 weeks. I'm astonished when I see states that are shoulder to shoulder at the beach already. I mean, even in New York, I mean, who's paid the highest price to see what they have to do to manage the parks. So it seems like we're already forgetting. And I think moral courage really means to remember and to stick with it. We can't let this be a 3-day memory or 3-week. I think we really have to see these systems that have been exposed and really figure out where are we going to make our difference now that this has come.
Well, thank you for taking your time to talk with me today. It's been a joy, and I've enjoyed serving on the board with you and serving under you. And I wish you luck wish you blessings, not luck, as you transition into
Thank you.
church ministry. Well, thank you.